Everyday life in the Soviet Union, the shopping runaround. The author, Hedrick Smith, was head of the New York Times office in Moscow from 1971 to 1974. The following passage is adapted from Mr. Smith's book, The Russians, which was published in 1976 by Quadrangle or the New York Times Book Company. 1. I had heard about consumer shortage before going to Moscow, but only when we began the shop there did the Russian customers' problems really have meaning for me. Customers the word overweight in lines, but Soviet lines have a special quality all their own. Typically, the Soviet woman spends 2 hours a day in line, 7 days a week. Personally, I have known of people who stood in line 90 minutes to buy 4 pineapples and 3.5 hours to buy 3 large heads of cabbage, only to find the cabbage were gone as they approached the front of the line. Lines can run from a few yards to nearly a mile. Some friends of ours watched a line of people in Moscow signing up to buy rugs. The line lasts 2 days and nights and ran for across all through apartment development. In summary, the writer explains that in the Soviet Union there were many shortage of goods, so people had to stand in long line for a long time, and sometimes the items were gone before they reached the front. For example, in Islamic perspective, in Islam, people are taught to be patient and not to hoard goods during shortage. In personal experience, I once waited in a long line for popular food, but it was sold out before my turn. In local culture, in Indonesia, people also line up for basic goods when there is a shortage like cooking oil. 2. In spite of all of this, the natural reaction of the Russian woman when she sees a line forming is to get in it immediately even before she knows what is being sold. However, Soviet lines are more fluid than they appear. In most stores, for example, shoppers must stand in not one but 3 lines for any purchase. The first, to select a purchase and find out its price. The second, to pay a cashier somewhere else in the store and get a receipt. And the third, to go pick up the purchase and turn in the receipt. In summary, Russian people often join a line immediately even if they don't know what is being sold, and the shopping system is complicated because they have to stand in multiple lines. For example, in Islamic perspective, Islam teaches us to act with knowledge, not just follow orders without understanding. In personal experience, I once followed a trend without knowing much about it and later regretted it. In local culture, many people join long lines during big sales even if they don't really need the items. 3. But in dairy store one morning, I found out that the game is both simpler and more complex than that. I went in to buy some cheese, butter, and bolognese sausage, which were in 3 separate departments, each with its own line, 9 lines. In summary, the writer experiences the complex shopping system where each item has a different line. For example, in Islamic perspective, Islam encourages order and efficiency in daily life. In personal experience, I have gone to a supermarket where I had to move around to get different items. In local culture, in traditional markets, people usually go to different sellers for different products. 4. Rather quickly talk. I noticed that experienced shoppers were skipping the first stage. They knew what most items cost, so they went directly to the cashier for their receipts. After studying prices, I did that too. Then I went to the cheese line, the longest probably 20 people to get the words over with first. I was in line less than a minute when the woman in front of me asked me to hold her place. She darted off to the butter and milk line. The cheese line was moving so slowly that she got her butter and milk and returned before we had advanced 3 feet. I decided to take the rakes too, and I got back with my butter while the cheese line was still inching along. In summary, experienced shoppers use strategies such as keeping certain steps to get their items faster. For example, in Islamic perspective, Islam allows smart thinking as long as it does not harm others. In personal experience, I learned tricks like coming early to avoid long lines. In local culture, people often find faster ways, like asking someone to help hold a place in line. 5. Then it suddenly occurred to me that all over the store, people were getting into line, holding places, leaving, returning. Everyone was using the cheese line as home base. That was why it was barely moving. It kept expanding in the middle. So I got the man behind me to hold my place, and I went off to buy my bologna. Once again, it worked. It took me 22 minutes to buy butter, sausage, and cheese, but instead of being furious, I felt as if I had beaten the system. In summary, people help each other by holding places in line so they can buy other items. The writer feels like he has beaten the system. For example, is in Islam perspective, Islam teaches cooperation and helping each other. In personal experience, I once asked a friend to hold my place in line. In local culture in Indonesia, it is common to ask someone to keep your spot while you go somewhere else. 6. This 6. This competitive shopping gives an atmosphere of tension to Russian life. People barge into store and bump into each other with faces set in combative expressions. You have to understand, said a kind, gray-haired person, that for as long as we can remember, shopping has been a struggle. Life is a struggle. In summary, the difficult shopping situation creates tension and competition, making people more aggressive. For example, in Islam perspective, Islam teaches patience and forbids hurting others. In personal experience, I have seen people pushing each other during big sales. In local culture, during major discount, people can become impatient and emotional. 7. There is hardly any effective advertising to help shoppers. Americans complain about the content commercial in the United States, but they might reconsider if they were exposed to the customer blackout in Russia. A typical subfit it might be if you want to live to arrive. old age and be beautiful, modest, and throughout and truthful. Drink tea. Most newspapers publish without it. The shopper has no handy yellow page or daily newspaper, supermarket, or department store aids to help her decide where to shop. In summary, there is almost no advertising to help shoppers, so they lack information about products and stores. For example, in Islam perspective, Islam encourages honesty and clear information in trade. In personal experience, I have felt confused choosing products because of limited information. In local culture, in Indonesian, advertisement and promotion help people decide what to buy. 8. Bribery is widespread. Low pay, $80 to $20 monthly. Sales clerk take a portion of attractive items and sell them secretly to regular customers who have either left a bribe in advance or can be counted on to pay a high price on delivery. 10 to 15 rubles on a 60 ruble raincoat is standard. In 1976, the ruble was equivalent to $132. In summary, bribery is common. Store employees secretly sell goods to curtain customers at higher prices. For example, in Islamic perspective, bribery is clearly forbidden in Islam. In personal experience, I have heard about people using connection to get rare items. In local culture, in some places, insider practices still happen. 9. So common is this practice that the Soviet press is always complaining about it, but it doesn't do any good. Crocodile, the Soviet humor magazine, once showed a department store employee promotion some newly arrived items. Dear customers, in the leather goods department, 5,000 imported women's purses have been received. 450 of them have been bought by store employees. 49 are under the counter and have been ordered in advance for friends. One purse is in the display window. We invite you to visit the leather department to buy this purse. In summary, this corruption is very common, and even though the media criticize it, nothing really changes. For example, in Islamic perspective, Islam teaches us to promote good and prevent wrongdoing. In personal experience, I often see problems being criticized but not solved. In local culture, in Indonesia, some issues are frequently discussed but difficult to fix. Thank you for watching.